Welcome to the Local Marketing Source Weekly Update, brought to you by localmarketingsource.com.
This week's Local Marketing Update is brought to you by Scott Gallagher. Scott is the co-founder of Local Marketing Source and has become the recognized expert in providing online marketing services to local businesses. Follow Scott on Twitter at ScottGallagher5 and on Facebook.com/Scott P. Gallagher.
Hey guys, well, good afternoon. Scott Gallagher here with Local Marketing Source, and we're bringing you our weekly local marketing industry update. Now, next week's LMS member call is going to be Wednesday, December 17th at 4 p.m. Eastern. This is going to be a fun week. I got a few different things to talk about this week. We have, going to be talking about the three big companies that are out there, and every so often I like to get on these calls and something changes during the week, and I get the opportunity to come out and say and share my opinions on whether I think that a business's decision is worthy or not. And I'm excited today to come out and pigeonhole Facebook and demonstrate and show some evidence that what we see at Facebook is they don't likely, they're making some mistakes. So when we take a look at it, but before we talk about Facebook, just some additions to Google My Business, and we know that there's been some changes with that in the last few weeks. So I want to talk about that, as well as Bing. And Bing has made some big updates, and typical fashion of Bing, they're following suit of Google, and how Bing is now added and enhanced Google's Panda. So what all that means. All right, so let's get started here. First off with Google My Business. Because we got so many students on the line, new students as well. I'm not too sure exactly as to how far along everybody is and how up to date you are with all the Google My Business changes. Essentially, Google has been working since 2009 on local, and in 2009 they introduced Google Places. And the brand of Google Places has changed 2 or 3 times in the last 4 years. And we've seen a lot of changes in local. As a matter of fact, I just got communicated today by an old employee that used to work for me. And he now got himself a new marketing position at an e-commerce site, and has reached out to me to ask some questions. And he says, Scott, really, what has changed? And he was throwing out some of the terminology. I was like, oh God, it gave me a perspective of how far we've come in the last 4 years. And one theme that, we kept throwing back out was, well, it's just marketing. He was asking, well, what type of tools that are out there? Well, you guys know how I feel about all these tools. And, he says, well, what about article marketing and link building? And I said, well, links is exposure. It's still important, but you got to have the value that's out there. And so being published on 100 different article sites versus he's in the DJ equipment business. And I said, as opposed to being published and having a nice article written in say a DJ magazine or a DJ based website, is going to go a lot farther. Well, these things tend to make a lot of sense. But getting back to Google My Business now, because that's where I started with some of the changes, it's really realizing how far Google has come in 4 years. And when you start to look at the learning curve that Google has gone through in these last 4 years, it's very, very clear that a company that's supposed to be as smart as Google is and have some of the smartest, most capable engineers in the world, it puzzles me that 4 years later, we're only as far along the online business solutions as we are today. I would have felt like that we should have been a lot further along, and development should have gone a lot further. But it's very clear that when we see companies like Google and Apple and Amazon, and we're going to talk about Facebook, that all are very slow to market when it comes to local businesses and have continually changed their strategies over time, it tells us a few different things. It definitely depicts the complexity of what these companies are trying to accomplish. And it's very likely that the complexity is a lot bigger and larger than what they initially anticipated. And, some of the challenges on the big service are pretty evident that, to be able to offer a solution, you can't offer halfway there. In other words, these companies really want to accomplish from the point of lead generation to the point of having the money in the bank. Lead gen to sale, the customer and retention. They're investing in loyalty programs that increase customer retention. These companies are investing in POS systems for point of sale. They're obviously their search engines, so they've invested significantly in paid and organic search and whatnot. They have bought up inventory software companies to be able to cater to all of this. But I know one thing, working in the operational software world that I come from, it was in the transportation business, that even with courier-based software, it wouldn't work for the trucking business. Well, the only difference between those two companies is the vehicle that's being used. The drivers are the same, the management's the same, the driver workforce is the same, the hiring processes, even the SIC codes that are used for government and taxation purposes are the same. But yet, from an operational software standpoint, there's a lot of internals that tended to be a little bit different. We couldn't use this delivery software for routed work or cartage work as well. It got very, very difficult. And, just in that one little world, let's talk about inventory software for a moment. I've had inventory software as a client, and inventory software is the same gamut. That, yes, you've got the umbrella of inventory software, but these inventory software companies specifically focus on certain niches. And because the needs of, let's say a retail shop that wants to manage their inventory, and they've got dated or timed aspects, and so you would want a first in first out type of environment for, let's say, a clothing line. But a vintage clothing line, you definitely don't want to operate an inventory system on a FIFO system. That's FIFO, first in first out. In a lot of cases, so just the management of inventory under that umbrella as well. What I'm trying to get here is that local business, just getting into the whole local business realm, you can't just deal with local businesses. There's 23 million in the United States. When we start to segment the needs of these 23 million, that scope gets massive. And whether it's just dealing with just restaurants, if Google only dealt with restaurants, that in itself would be a massive feat. So they're uncovering a lot of these operational challenges. People at Google don't have experience in operating a flower shop or a restaurant or a courier company or a dentist office. A year ago, we were running into a lot of the problems with a lot of the practitioners, for example, and that clearly indicated to us that Google and the others didn't fully understand the whole branding aspects of a practitioner in a business. Well, then they launched practitioner pages that were mandatory, and these changes happened, and they only happened a year ago. One of the bigger problems in local that we dealt with initially, that Google actually tackled initially, I feel like that I got a phone call one day, and it's recorded. I got the video of it. It was really awesome, from a manager at Bing, because he found one of my blog posts, and it was discussion of service area. And immediately, 6 months after that phone call, Google announced some major changes on how service area was established. And what I find the most ironic is when we think about service area businesses, the trucking industry, for example, is probably about 30 or 40 times bigger than the courier industry. It's massive. There's trucks everywhere on the interstates. I mean, the trucking industry in the United States is ridiculously large. But when we talk about a service area business, we're talking about plumbers, electricians, not chiropractors, couriers, transportation, taxi service companies. The list just goes on and on. But when Google made their changes to the service area, the one industry that they correlated it to was the one industry we focused in on, which was the one industry I wrote about in that article, and that was the courier industry. So whether Google was reading anything that we wrote, I don't know. But that's not necessarily what's relevant for the discussion that I'm trying to have here. Is that, you know, the problems that we were dealing with was, you take a city of Chicago, 8 million people in this city. It's a 350 kilometer, 200-mile radius around to drive around the city. And real estate, obviously downtown, is very expensive. Imagine how expensive it is to have a warehouse downtown. So there's not a lot of warehouses downtown Chicago. They're all in the burbs. But a courier service-based company that has a warehouse out in the suburbs that could be 50 miles away is not relevant for where their customers are, even if they're located downtown. And we were having a lot of problems back in 2009 and 2010 of ranking these businesses that had warehouses located in suburbs but serviced the centroid of another city. Well, that's when service area was essentially established. And what I'm getting at here is it took them 2 years to figure that part out. Well, I banged my head against the wall thinking, well, shit, you should have known this from the get-go when you started the right, that there was a service. But they never had anybody that worked in the transportation business that worked at Google. So how were they to anticipate this? What they could have solved to get a little bit quicker, I don't know what the answer is there. But my point is real simple here, is that we're not even close to the end of where a business portal should be for a small business on a broad spectrum from a company like Google or Facebook or Amazon or Apple. We've got a long way to go. And Google has recently launched Google My Business. And what we are seeing is a lot of change in a very short period of time, some major changes that are happening. And so Google has made some updates on their guidelines as whatnot. And these things are important to know. Guidelines have a lot of relevancy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the guidelines. And, something that's important here, for example, old school was that, I'm going to say old school or the old way versus the new way, because these changes have just come in the last 2 weeks or week. And, for example, Google had depicted that a certain guideline to make a business eligible for a Google Plus page was that a business must make in-person contact with a customer during its stated hours. In-person contact with a business during its stated hours. Well, my marketing agency probably might not qualify. Yeah, okay, I met with, not a client, a prospect today, in person, because they were 5 miles away from my office. If we earn their business, they'll be my closest client ever. My farthest client is in Australia. Do you think I'll ever have a chance to meet with that person? 98% of my business, well, I don't know what the number is. Actually, I take that back. A good portion of my business, at least 80% of my business, I never meet with my clients. So it's very arguable that my company did not qualify to meet the guidelines of Google Local. But am I a local business? I have an office. I have a front door that allows customers and prospects to come in. They don't come in. We talk on the phone and we talk digitally. So, of course, that changed, and Google expanded their guidelines that you must be available during those business hours. Well, what does that mean now? Have you ever tried cold calling chiropractors and their availability? They're not always available. What about the garage door industry with a whole bunch of guys that have pickup trucks that aren't answering their cell phones and taking it through voicemail? So have they nailed their guideline down yet? No. I mean, I just thrown out 2 types of local businesses that are legitimate local businesses that don't follow the practices that they put forth. So we're going to have to see some changes. But it's nice to see that Google has expanded what these businesses are. In other words, companies that aren't demonstrating on the internet that they are physically meeting with customers in person, you're not going to get hurt as much anymore. Now, any additional information, certain relevant information, it could have been included in other sections of your business information, like your address and categories, and you could have mixed this up and whatnot. While Google explicitly said that certain marketing taglines and phone numbers, store codes, and URLs were the only types of what we called descriptors that weren't valid. In other words, on your Google Places profile page, you couldn't put a marketing tagline on there. You couldn't put certain URLs as certain descriptors, but it still left a lot to be open in terms of what can go on there and what not. Now, Google has added more restriction on the information that you can change. I kind of like to think about it as terms of like the old, those strip malls that you got the different types of strip malls, and one strip mall landlord just allows for any type of signage, anything on the windows, anything in front, versus another strip mall landlord on the other side of the spectrum, says all businesses in my strip mall have to have the same type of sign, the same color, the same sizes. Most strip malls fall somewhere in between. Well, Google is trying to be the extreme and saying, businesses, this is what you got to show, and this is the way it's to show. And I personally think that that is going to change with Google. I personally think that they are getting it wrong, in my opinion, because it doesn't allow for a local business to properly allow themselves to brand themselves. Branding is very, very emotional. And we achieve branding. How do I say this? It is when we've effectively branded a company, a consumer, when they have a need and they've decided that they have a need, and that brand comes into your head, you've accomplished your goal of effectively branding. And we've got, as marketers, we've got certain tools in our toolbox that we could use to increase brand awareness. And when we talk about the MEBRAM study, that there are 3 ways to influence human behavior. Everything we do in marketing is influencing human behavior. And those 3 ways are our words, our tonality, and our voice. Our physiology. We know that physiology, how we capture information with our eyes, has greater influence on our human behavior than information that we capture with our hands or with our ears, at least according to that study. Well, back to the marketing books, it adheres to that as well, that the most effective way to create brand awareness is through visual aspects. So if a company like Google is restricting us for having our visual aspects, in other words, logos, marketing taglines, and whatnot on these pages, we're not achieving the goals that the businesses are trying to achieve. Well, Google can only tell businesses so far what they can do and what they can't do. I know they've got a tremendous amount of power, but collectively, their organic search is based off of user input. And businesses do what users are looking for. So I have to assume that Google is making some mistakes into this regards, and we're going to see changes sometime down the future. I would put a bet. I would bet, and I'm not a betting man, that we're going to see these changes in 6 months or less, because it just doesn't make any sense. Now, I could be wrong. I've been wrong in business a lot more than I've been right. But when I look at these companies and I analyze it this way and I close my eyes in a dark room, I got to think about the masses. And the internet today, maybe not next year, but the internet today is the most democratic environment that mankind has ever seen. Yeah, I'm supposed to live in a free country, a democratic country, and I come from a democratic country. Americans think that Canada is not democratic. Americans think that Canada is socialized. And after moving to America and understanding what free really is, well, that's a whole different argument. And that's not a can of worms I'm interested in opening up, especially when, well, maybe it is the time to open it up when I've got the one-way communication and I can mute you guys when I want. But that's what, radio hosts tend to do and blah, blah, blah. But the internet provides a lot more democracy. And I learned this in the year 2009 when I had an internet service provider, and they in my opinion, they broke my contract, so I blogged about them. And within a few days, I got a phone call from the vice president of this company because the title of my blog post said "See Beyond Sucks," and I shared my story. I then, 6 months later or something of that nature, I had a problem with Comcast, and I just, for the fun of it, tweeted. Guess what? I got a phone call within 24 hours from Comcast, from their customer service department. What I learned real quickly that in the year 2009, corporations invested heavily into the customer service department that have another customer service department. Not every company, but most major companies these days now handle customer service in different ways. If they get a complaint through a phone call and somebody comes in or comes into the store and complains, they handle it one way because they can shut the customer up. But it's a lot harder to shut somebody up online and stuff that's online, so they have to do more. In other words, isn't that proof that these major companies have restricted our customer service to the point of their greatest profitability? That's probably true. But now that they have a chance to be thrown under the bus and exposed, it's like, wow, okay, well, now we're really going to try to come and help you and solve your problem. You want to get stuff done, you complain about it online. The internet is affording that, and it's affording the democracy of it. Whether that's going to stick around with all this net neutrality discussions that are happening, that is, if this passes Congress in the United States, this is going to be maybe not one of the biggest, because there could be a lot, but this is going to, if you really get to understand what this whole idea of what net neutrality of that they're trying to pass through Congress, it has nothing to do with being neutral at all. That is marketing at its finest that the government has nothing to do with net neutrality, and it's only going to hurt the consumer in many different ways. It's horrible. It's disgusting. And it's going to remove the democracy of the internet. What do I think is going to happen? I think it's going to pass. I think the United States government is going to pass this concept of net neutrality and remove freedoms away on the internet. In other words, it's going to give big business the gateway to get access to consumers and not small business. You're going to have to pay to be exposed on the internet highway. In other words, Comcast and these data providers, they're going to own the internet because they will have decision-making power as to what traffic goes to your computer or your mobile device and what traffic doesn't. Guess what country does that today? How many times have you seen China in the news for blocking this and blocking that? It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. How is that democracy? It's not. It's communistic. You start to share, there's two things in business that you should never talk about, and that's religion and politics. So I try to be careful when I share my opinions, but hey, they're my opinions. I own them. You could agree or disagree with me on that. But anyhow, these are some of my thoughts that I think about when I see some of these big updates with Google, is that I really do believe that Google is in the best interest of their users. Larry Page and Sergey Brin never got together as a partnership to go into business together. They never built Google to be a business in the first place. Their objective was simply just to organize the world of information. They did that. They did a good job at it, and they became the fastest growing, richest company. At one point in time, they're no longer the richest, but they became the fastest growing company ever. They grew exponentially quick and became super, super rich. They became super rich by having a solution that was 100% focused on the user and not on the financial objectives of the creator. They have said numerous times that if they mess with that formula, and we've seen it, look at Microsoft. I mean, the list just can go on of how many companies have fallen down over the last hundreds of years, major corporations. Google doesn't need to chase the money when they've got the user base that they've got, and they offer a good platform. So I do believe that there's good faith inside the company of Google, and I do believe that there, at least, as long as the shareholders don't get power over Larry and Sergey, they're good. And when they had their IPO, that was something that they wanted. They've got 66% of control of the company. So as long as that control stays above 50%, and those two guys that are in there, this is a company that I'm behind 100%, and that they are going to get it right. Even though I'm talking right now that they've got a few things wrong, they're going to have to get it right, because the businesses aren't going to go and use this Google My Business. All right, Bing. Bing just announced that content quality is a primary factor for ranking. All right, well, we've talked about quality of content. Content is king. And what is quality content? And it means a lot. How is a search engine supposed to determine what is quality content? Does Panda ring a bell here, guys? Is this reminding you of Panda? Do you think that this is Bing's Panda update? What a confirmation for a company like Google when they launch an algorithmic update like Panda. They get so much backlash from the community, and then others follow. That's kind of like a sign of endearment. So Bing has changed their terminology just a little bit. They say that quality is based off of authority, utility, and presentation. In the world of Google, we say that quality is based off of trust and authority. So we would think that utility and presentation that Bing is labeling it is the same element that Google is labeling trust. So let's look at some of this right now. What defines, what makes a piece of quality content authoritative? So what are we talking about here? We're talking about a blog post on a local business website, or a chiropractor page that's dealing with the symptom of, let's say, sciatica, okay? Or a dentist that is focusing in on teeth whitening. And we create a piece of content. We create an article. We create a video. We create an infographic. How is that piece going to get authority? Well, what if I had that article and it was published in what if the ICPA published it? That's the International Chiropractic of Pediatric Association. In other words, it's the governing body for chiropractors and kids. And if they published an article that my client wrote, you think maybe that article would have some authority to it when such a big governing body is publishing it? So when you want to create quality content that has authority, the first thing you got to think about is considering who the audience is. Well, this is customer segmentation. And we could take almost any business and find 4 or 5 different customer segment groups. You guys are listening to Local Marketing Source, and I'm going to use LMSs as an example of segmentation and how content of authority could be created for that. Now, when we're marketing Local Marketing Source, I was just having this meeting yesterday because we're now investing into paid advertising that we've never done before. Everything's been organic. And I think we're going to throw somewhere around $1,500 a month into paid advertising. That's a big chunk of change. That scares me. I'm not a paid guy. I don't know paid very well, so I'm asking a lot of questions, and I'm a little bit concerned. Now, when we started to get into discussion of, for example, writing ads, as I've segmented my audience before, and I feel like that LMS has four current segments right now. And we have students that fill each of those 4 different segments. You got the complete newbie that has 0 experience in sales or operations. You got the sales guy or the entrepreneurial spirited person that has sales experience or market or business experience, but doesn't know the execution of getting a business to number 1. You got the people, and a lot of our students are this, that have been around the internet marketing world for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, affiliate marketing, e-commerce, standard SEO, email marketing, social media marketing, and decided that they want to focus in on the local niche, but they don't have any sales experience or client acquisition experience. That's number 3. And the 4th segment we have are established agencies. So if I'm talking to a complete newbie versus an established agency on either spectrum, or I'm talking to somebody that knows how the execution of it but doesn't know how to sell versus somebody that can sell anything but just doesn't know how to execute it, my messaging is going to be completely different. People's objections are going to be very different, that they have to overcome. So we create marketing material, and we created sales channels that cater to each of those audience groups, and then we expose that content into those areas. So for an example, somebody that's a complete newbie that doesn't have anything, our lead generation funnel for that is a free marketing course. It's a fundamental marketing course. It's a high-level overview of all the different marketing concepts. And so when a complete newbie goes down that path, we drive education to them. They get in, they're able to see, 6 or 7 of the videos in the portal, and they have an autoresponder that comes with them. Now, what type of authoritative content would I write or create, and where would I have that content exposed to have authority to it? Well, if I'm writing an internet marketing piece and it's published by Search Engine Land, that's going to give me authority for established agencies, people that are already in the industry. But if I write an article and I get it published with, say, Forbes magazine, actually, no, Entrepreneur magazine would be a better example. That would give me authority to the segment of the complete newbie, because it's a magazine built for entrepreneurs. Their audience are entrepreneurs. It's not a discussion on an internet marketing agency per se. And we're trying to cater to an audience that has the entrepreneurial spirit, but doesn't necessarily have internet marketing experience. So authority definitely is created by where the content resides. Has anybody ever heard that before? Because to me, that sounds really, really simple. I didn't write that down. I am now, because I think that makes a lot of sense. Utility on content quality. So what is utility as far as Bing? When we start to break down the concept of trust and break it into 2, we start to look at utility. This is trying to determine how useful the content is, if it's detailed enough for the searcher to accomplish their task. Does the page have enough supporting citations? Exposure. Is it detailed enough for the typical searcher? Content is king. Not quality, quantity is important, but don't sacrifice quantity for quality, and vice versa is what they're saying. In other words, just make a business better. Obviously, a factor that's going to harm content quality is repurposed or recycled content. I want to give a little bit of advice on recycling content. And there was a day that we used to have in our industry. I don't know if it still exists. If this stuff still exists, if people are teaching this, somebody on the line, please speak up. I'd really like to hear this. But spinning content and spinning software, and you'd put an article into the spinning software and it'd spit out 10 articles for you. And essentially all it was doing was finding words, going to a thesaurus, and changing that word to another word. The messaging ended up being the same. It didn't read very well. It didn't work very well. That's recycling content. If I take one article and I read it and then I go to rewrite it, that's recycling content. That's plagiarism. But the moment that I go and get a second article and have two articles in front of me and I put it together into one, it's not plagiarism anymore. It's called research. So any article that I'm writing, I want to make sure that I am pulling from 3 sources of information. And when you pull from at least 3, you are creating material that is unique enough to the writer. Little rule of thumb I like to follow when I'm trying to quote unquote repurpose content. Because let's face it, in the internet marketing world, I'm not a dentist, okay? And I've got dentist clients. I don't deliver packages. I got courier clients. I got taxi clients. The only thing I could read about, and knowing about running a taxi business is having conversations with my client. But I'll never know his business like he does. He does it every day for 20 years. I mean, so I'm not a doctor of chiropractic care. I'm extremely passionate about it, and I know a lot about it. And I could write content that chiropractors are going to read and learn from. But just because I don't have that degree of chiropractic care, I don't have the same credibility as a chiropractor when they talk. So my business, we have to repurpose and we have to recycle content. We don't have a choice because we're not doctors. At the same time, the search engines are trying to rid everybody of recycled and repurposed content. So we got to define what repurposed and recycled really is inside our own business and inside our own mindset. And that's why I always try to get 3 different sources of information before I produce one piece myself. And every piece of material, well, not every piece of material, 95% of the material that's inside the local marketing source portal is repurposed material. You guys are paying a monthly membership fee to get content from us that's just somewhere else. Well, I mean, I spent $50,000 on getting a marketing degree. Well, you're getting a lot of that education and that content, right? I've had to go to my marketing books and pulled stuff out. Nothing's word for word. Every single piece of script in there is my own wording. Nothing's copied. It's just repurposed content. And the third one being presentation. So we've got authority, utility, and presentation. This is about making sure that the content on the page is easy to find and easy to read. Whoa, what is that? Doesn't Google talk about something called usability as a factor? So Bing just feels like that presentation has to do with content quality. Google doesn't say that usability has to do with content quality, but they're the exact same things. And they're getting to the end result. They're just using different lingo to get there. It's so God, our industry is so fragmented. I wish these people would just get their heads out of their ass and get all their shit together sometimes, because it's the same stuff. But anyhow, it's about usability. So I mean, Bing is really looking at usability in a lot of different ways, and what are the factors that they say is usable or not? Well, you know what? You can go all day long and read and study and use all the different tools to determine what's usable and what not. But a chiropractor website in South Carolina that achieves 100% usability is not going to achieve 100% usability for a chiropractor website in Crystal Lake, Illinois. You can't. I mean, we're just based off the argument of the jargon, the geographical jargon that's being used. And we know that jargon is very different, especially when you get into different countries. I mean, Nick's on the line. He lives in New Zealand. I mean, his dialect of the English language is very different than mine, being in North America. Actually, I can't speak for New Zealand. Nick, if I'm saying anything that's off, it's off. I've only experienced Australia, but terms like hey, I don't know. They have some really weird, funny terms. We're gonna all hang out at the Barbie tonight. And oh man, I hear my niece saying, oh, I can't find my sunnies. Like in Canada, we have, we use the word Chesterfield. How many Americans know what Chesterfield means? Or a toque? I wore my toque today. How many Americans know what toque means or how to spell it? So just usability has a lot of factors that are involved. Are the search engines taking into account local jargon? I highly doubt it. I mean, they don't have near half their stuff together in areas. That's probably 10 years away from doing anything like that. But the point is that they can look at a lot of different things in terms of usability. We don't know what they're looking at. I could probably come up with 100 different variations of usability that a search engine can measure to determine it, how they determine the weight and whatnot. So don't put a lot of value into these tools that are going to help you out with usability. My opinion, the best way to determine usability of content is to poll an audience. You don't need a big sample size either. Well, polling an audience, I mean, there's two types of market research that exists on our planet. There's primary research and there's secondary research. And we are always taught, and just take my word for it right now. I mean, I could argue this, and if you want to get on the phone and get into the whole debate about it. But primary research by far exceeds secondary research. Primary research is where you go out and you get the information yourself. Secondary research is where somebody's already conducted a study and you're pulling off of their data. So as long as you're conducting studies that you're taking into account your margins of errors and your variances, and if you're using, let's say, a questionnaire or a survey, you've done your job proposing the questions appropriately and using the right types of questions. Far too often our surveys just confusing and you cannibalize data. But assuming that you're not cannibalizing your data, you're going to get a lot more back from primary research than secondary. I must have eaten my Wheaties this morning. We're now 47 minutes into this, and I'm not even through my notes, guys. We haven't even gotten into any live calls. But my attendance is still at 100%. So I look at that as a metric and say, well, oh, my mistake. We lost one person. We had one person drop on this call. As long as my attendance is above 90%, that usually says that, hey, we're offering decent content. We're not wasting people's time. So I hope that's the case. And I know sometimes you're on here for 20 minutes. Last, Facebook search. All right, this is a big mistake. I think Facebook has made a big mistake. I'm going to come out on record and say it. Why? Because they've ignored local again. Why they're ignoring local? Well, maybe it's not really a mistake. Maybe they're looking at Google and all the changes that Google has made, and maybe they've seen the failures of both Yahoo and Bing, and maybe they've seen the lengthy delays. Remember last year when I think it was the iPhone 5 when it came out, and Google launched Google Maps instead of, sorry, Apple launched Apple Maps inside their phone. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but I think it was last year with the iPhone 5. And mainstream media all over the board was bastardizing Apple. So it's possible that Facebook really isn't ignoring anything, that they're waiting. But what this comes down to is, Facebook made some major changes on their graph search. And graph search, God, I remember when Mark Zuckerberg introduced graph search, and he came on stage, and the crowd was just blown away, and I was blown away by it. I mean, at that point in time when I heard that, I remember saying that this is it. I mean, Facebook is going to take down Google. I've obviously changed my tune quite a bit from that, and I can talk a lot about that. But it was the graph search, it was Facebook's graph search that predicated Google Plus social network. It was that important. It's that powerful. Google needed to get that and get that data, because otherwise graph search was just wow. So looking at my notes, it was available. Graph search was available 2013. Nick, do you have graph search, or do you know much about graph search overseas? Because graph search doesn't work on mobile devices the same way it does on desktops here, and it's only available, according to my notes here, it's only available in U.S. English. And I know that graph search is still not showing all the results. They're still rolling a lot of that out. So, like, for example, when Facebook introduced hashtags, you can utilize graph search to look for that, or you can say, I played around with graph search last March. It was about 2 months after it was out. I exploited graph search a little bit. Remember when I could search for everybody. Like, here's an example. It was coming up to March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. It was about 2 months before it, and I realized, heck, I can find everybody on Facebook that has the same last name as me, Gallagher. And then I can go and have a customized shirt made that said, "Kiss me, I'm a Gallagher." And then I can market to them directly on Facebook to only Gallaghers. I bet the conversion rates are going to be pretty high. It was. I spent $200 on advertising over a 4-day period on Facebook, and I ended up getting $1,000 in sales. So I made $800. But I had to stop myself and say, well, this is not the business I'm in, and I don't think that this is going to be that sustainable. And sure enough, somewhere around St. Patrick's Day, Facebook removed that from graph search. Or not, sorry, didn't remove from graph search, but restricted you to advertising specifically off of last name. Well, then I started to think, I could use graph search. I could say, hey, find all the Canadians that live in Illinois that like the Chicago Blackhawks. It's pretty powerful, right? Anybody that's single out there, find all the single females between this age that are blonde, that are friends of friends. It's a dating site now too, huh? This graph search is pretty freaking awesome. But Facebook has come out and said, well, people that are on this site, they're only searching for people photos or sorry, I take this back. When Facebook launched it, they said people on Facebook are looking for people, photos, and places. Well, places being local. And when Facebook launched this, there was a lot in the media about the whole local aspects of it. And we were gearing up, thinking that Facebook has 1 point change billion users and everybody I know is on Facebook and whatnot, but certain statistics, that's where their revenue is. The revenue is coming from businesses that are selling something to advertise on the Facebook platform. Well, when a company like Google comes out and says, hey, we've made a lot of money advertising, but now we're going after local businesses because that's where the real money's at. Apple, same thing. Amazon, same thing. Why not Facebook? They haven't prioritized any releases, and you can still search for places, but there is no opportunity for local search. We'll see. I mean, maybe they know something. Maybe Facebook has realized this is just not an area for us to be, or maybe they haven't gotten their shit together. And I know it's tough for a small town Northern Ontario boy to say that about a company like Facebook, but we've seen it with Apple and we've seen it with Google. And if there's one thing I've learned in business is that, well, we can be whatever we want to be. I mean, just because they're bigger doesn't mean that we should fear them. So that really does genuinely come to the conclusion of this week's update, guys. I'm going to take 30 seconds right now, and I will be back to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks for watching the Local Marketing Industry Update. We've got these things coming out every single week, so if you liked with what you heard, just click the button right above me right here to subscribe to our channel. If you'd like to get a little bit more, right over here, go check out localmarketingsource.com. We've got free reports that you can grab. You can even register for a free marketing course to get in and see the portal. Or just go ahead and follow us on some of the social channels. We'll be around. Until next time.